Anderson's paper, like what you just did.
Yeah. So your paper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. Hello. Take my mask off for a second. Welcome to the second in the Far Hill Speaker Series. My name is Chris Leibner. I am the adult service librarian that helps run this. We want to thank everybody for coming. As you can see, we are very packed. So hopefully everybody gets to hear and see. We do have them mic'd, and if there's any glares or any issues, just let us know. So kind of hidden, but we do have some surveys if you're ever interested in letting us know how you feel. And I just wanted to thank everyone. This is pretty exciting. We're also trying new technology, so bear with us. It is a work in progress, but we are trying. So we really appreciate everybody's support for the Far Hill Speaker Series. I'm going to turn it over to Donna, who is the Oakwood Historic Society's representative, and she is going to introduce today's speaker. So thank you.
Well, first, I want to welcome you on behalf of the Oakwood Historical Society on such a beautiful day coming here. But I think this is going to be a really fascinating presentation. As Chris said, is the second one. We have one more next month in the spring series, but today's the important thing. We're really privileged to have retired Royal Air Force, bad habit, RAF retired Group Captain Andrew Lloyd. And for those of you not familiar with the RAF rank structure, that's an equivalent to a full colonel. During his distinguished 34-year RAF career, Andy served in the Allied Command Transportation Office, which is really significant. He was selected to lead an initiative to build a long-term campaign plan for NATO. The transformation plan aligns national and NATO plans for training, exercises, multi-domain doctrine development, operational guidance, and strategic plans. For those of you who are not in defense, that's really significant stuff. It tells you how to fight the war, get the stuff there, and accomplish everything that needs to be done in order to win. So complex plans were integrated and then implemented by the full NATO military committee. So again, significant work that was then adopted. From 2009 to 2012, he served as UK team chief overseeing Air Force Life Cycle Sustainment Program, where he directed major changes to the oversight of weapons system procurement. He did that as an exchange officer, working as an Air Force officer despite his RAF designation. And he served across the globe in support of airlift operations and has operational service in support of many modern campaigns, including Kosovo and Iraq. Group Captain Lloyd has always enjoyed history and its lessons that it brings. He's led many officer development tutorials in the battlefields of the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, which I think will be very important perspectives that he brings being from the UK to those of us who beat him. I'm just kidding. And he also supports the National Museum of the Air Force with Battle of Britain events and has held discussions at the IMAX on Winston Churchill and Dunkirk. Clearly, Andy has a true love of history, and I know just in the discussion we had before the presentation, it comes out loud and clear. This is going to be a great presentation. No pressure. So today we welcome Andrew Lloyd, who shares with us the United Kingdom's efforts at Bletchley Park, where German Enigma codes were broken, and the Dayton connection with that effort. So, Colonel Lloyd.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I will just check, am I heard at the back? Okay, good, thank you. So yes, I'm Andrew Lloyd, retired. I will start by saying I do work in a high-tech company now in Columbus, but if you see today, I can still be a technophobe with anything that I'm doing with these charts, so do bear with me. Fascinated by history, so that's something that's really grown with me over time. And when I went to Carolyn Park, it really got my interest in something I was unaware of as a Brit, which is that Bletchley Park didn't solve the code breaking all on its own. Believe me, I'm acutely aware of that today. Because, and I know many of you will have watched the historical comedy, The Patriot, But I was on the red team in that, or my ancestors were on the red team in that particular event. And again, I'm aware we lost. So what it showed and what Cowan Park told me is that there's two sides of the Atlantic. We work unbelievably closely together. That's why I'm here as an exchange officer, as I was in the Air Force Sustainment Center. And it's what I started to draw the thread on what was important between those two buildings that you see there, Bletchley Park and Building 26 of NCR, and why it matters today, and it does, and I'll come on to that. So I was told to take about 35 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes, and then questions. There'll probably be about 20 people come. So I'm very honoured and slightly intimidated to see so many. So my topic today does cover Bletchley Park and NCR. In fact, the one thing I will just say to you is one other little bit about here. So I come from Kettering, which is the other Kettering in England. My Welsh roots come from Montgomery County in Wales. And when we did my DNA Ancestry.com recently, where did my ancestors come in the years between 1800 and 1825? Dayton. So there you go. So if I have a cousin amongst you, fantastic. But yeah, it does seem I'm kind of being pointed at being here. So my topic covers Bletchley Park, as I mentioned, and NCR here in Montgomery County, and their combined role in breaking the German Enigma codes. Significantly, I want to look into why this area's role in World War II drove a relationship that endures today in probably the world's most successful intelligence sharing operation that there is in sharing organisation between nations. So as I mentioned, this is not at all an intimidating topic. Helped further to scare me when I read a little bit in the Cincinnati Enquirer that stated, film snubs Ohioans in breaking the Enigma codes. And that was in reference to the Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch. And it made no mention of Dayton. And again, it goes two sides of the Atlantic. What do we see of a story that was actually a war-winning story that drove me towards one of the things I'm going to do today? Is I don't really want to focus on who necessarily consider themselves up in this. The fact is, it's almost a wow moment of how much two nations did together to actually shorten the war and save thousands of lives. And it comes down to something that I put on this chart here, which was a letter from Eisenhower at the end of the war. And that one might be to Bletchley Park. I suspect something very similar came over this site, which attributes the joint work of NCR, Bletchley Park, and the US intelligence services, particularly Navy, with shortening the war, thousands of lives, global impact. And that was at the start of a relationship that this area kind of developed. So it's always important to make sure that we do give credit. And as I walk through this, first, I do want to just acknowledge that the Poles had actually broken the Enigma codes for Army back in the early 30s. Obviously, as Poland was overrun, it had to do something about it, and it handed what it knew to the British. So what was Enigma? Well, Enigma, you can see on this chart, was it had 3 wheels for Army, it had 4 wheels for Navy, but it was used across the Third Reich, and its main role was encryption of codes, messaging between the German forces, diplomats, weather stations, and basically the German war machine all across the globe. And its aim, through a highly complex system, was to make sure the Allies never had any inclination as to what was coming next from the Germans. So put simply, outnumbered, or at this stage Britain, outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched in every theatre for a while, had to think of how to outsmart the Nazis. This was going to have to be one of those ways, if it could be done. The tortuous path that this was to take was to lead in time to an agreement, as I've touched on, that would share the highest classifications of secrets across the globe on a multinational scale. Known today as the Five Eyes. And right at the end of this presentation, I'll just talk a little bit more about what on earth that even is and why it matters to us all today, particularly today, I would say. So I'm going to just move on to my next slide and just cover a little bit about what was happening in 1940 and that kind of time. To put it mildly, 1940 was not going well. Britain counted its successes as evacuating all of its troops and no equipment from Dunkirk. We do love a good underdog story, but that really kind of took it. And those of you who saw Dunkirk, the movie, and would have read a bit about it, it brought to life what a bad situation that was and how perilous and how it wasn't necessarily obvious that Britain would continue the fight. So that was one. And then there was the Battle of Britain where we considered not being invaded a victory. But again, really, are these victories at this stage? There were things going on. And one of those things that helped in the Battle of Britain was something that evolved and was continuing to evolve. Yes, we had radar. Yes, we had smart people in the Royal Air Force. Clearly, there's evidence of that in this room. But also, they were breaking the German Air Force codes. So not only were radar and Air Force planes getting to the right place, but the code breaking was being used to actually identify where attacks were going to come. And in some cases, they were having to ignore where those attacks were going to come, so they didn't betray that they'd actually broken codes. You imagine again the tough situation, knowing a town is going to be bombed, knowing you could stop it, and letting it go on. But that's where we were. And to remember as well, Britain was an island, and at that stage, therefore, isolated. Britain is roughly 1.5 times the size of Wyoming. And it had a population, I think back then, about 45 million. It needed to be fed, it needed war materials, as I talked about with Dunkirk, it lost pretty much every bit of equipment it had. So where we were was a battle for survival, and the U-boats were strangling the UK. Here's just a few figures that actually, as I got to these to see what the problem was in some kind of quantity, it's eye-watering. And again, if you're outgunned with material, you've got to find a smarter way to do this. But basically, if you take a look at these figures, when you see that 1941, they lost a mere 496 ships, and eye-watering in today's kind of thing. 1942, that was going up to over 1,000. March 93, that was 95 ships just in 1 month. 567,000 tons of shipping. To give you a feel for what that might mean, and I'm going to touch a bit on D-Day later and the impact of what was going on with NCR and Bletchley Park and what they did. This is the impact of just what? Two 6,000 ton ships on one 3,000 ton ship would have lost. 42 tanks, 8 howitzers, 88 other guns, 24 armored cars, 2,000 tons of stores, and 1,000 tons of gasoline. If you translate that into 1 month, what that meant, that could have meant, in simplistic mathematical terms, 1,600 tanks, 300 howitzers, 800 armored cars, 500,000 tons of gasoline. That, every single month, is the loss of an invasion force for D-Day. So every month that carried on, you were pushing D-Day back out, and the losses, the financial losses, the material that could not be replaced, were unsustainable to the Allies. So that's why it was time, as Churchill put it, gentlemen, we've run out of money, we now have to start thinking. We have many other quotes which probably aren't good for this room. So the doors opened with Bletchley Park. Now here's some interesting things, and it's why I sort of pose to you really. So why on earth am I here talking about the transatlantic, the war in the Atlantic in the middle of Ohio? And it is because, to us in this room, brains and intellect in this area were working on the solution. In 1940, US and UK intelligence contacts had begun. There was a Commander Denison and a Miss Aggie Driscoll from Northern Ohio, who had begun those efforts. The first sort of clash of ideologies and thinking came to be there. The British, with Alan Turing, Commander Denison, were moving towards a mathematical approach. Ms. Driscoll still works off very much on a crypto analytical approach. And that led to some tensions in who was right and who was wrong. Never necessarily goes well. The British had promised a fair and free exchange of information. But again, there were some suspicions below the surface. Is that what's happening? The British want the American resources, absolutely. But are they giving us the information they promised? We don't know. And I'm obviously looking at now from this side of the pond on that. But it became clear over time, Ms. Driscoll, and again, forgive me, there's no intention to cause any offence in this, but it's clear she was ready to move on. She was replaced by a gentleman called Friedman, and he built up a fantastic rapport with his British counterparts. So much so that back then, and again, when you're an island that's short of just about everything, golf balls mattered. And Friedman built up such a rapport with Commander Denison, he got him a load of golf balls, and that kind of cemented the relationship pretty strong. But it started to build the trust between the two organisations. Bear in mind, they're secretive organisations, so how much harder is it to do? But the trust started to build. Started therefore in 1941, and remember, 8th of February 1941, as I'm sure you're all acutely aware, the US was not at war at that stage. But the first Americans visited Bletchley Park, 4 of them. And it was where Alan Turing had devised a solution, his first bomb machines, to break the German three-wheeled Enigma codes. So to go over there to build an exchange program that would build, from what I see, to about 100 Americans who would then be based at Bletchley Park. Oddly, and this will come as a surprise, the Americans who went to Bletchley Park were not impressed with the British food. And not to worry, because it's not a touchy subject with me. In fact, I would never have mentioned it. But I would just draw your attention to curry and baked beans with breakfast. But in truth, back then, actually, I was going to just say, and it carried on into the 50s with some of the rationing. It continued to hinder our delicate cuisine, if you like. So, pre-war Americans who were still enjoying all of the delights there, going to Bletchley Park, did find that there was a clash. No clash, that's the wrong word, but basically they struggled a lot with the kind of lifestyle that was going on over there. You were in a war-torn Britain that was in the middle of, it had suffered the Blitz, it was suffering rationing, and it was using raw materials simply to survive. But it brings us right here to Montgomery County. So again, I touch on some of these areas just to sort of to acknowledge in some respects. But there was a locally based intellect and businessman, Deeds. And of course, we had, he was president of NCR. And from what I've read of Deeds, he had done a lot to strategically place NCR in a place where it was at the forefront of electronic technology of the day. In doing so, what he'd done was created the circumstances where it became necessary, or where it became a very good thing, that NCR was in that place, and then the military had seen, here's an organization that could handle some of those cutting edge challenges that we are now facing. So NCR became a natural place to be awarded work that would turn into working on the Enigma codes. I will, of course, touch on Mr. Dash in just a few moments' time, but it is also worth, I just want to reach back a little bit on Deeds to say, I know he did a huge amount in transforming the area of Dayton, along with Charles Kettering. And I saw a huge effort that had gone into supporting World War I, and again, seemed a very visionary gentleman indeed. But the ties began to form between the two nations, and out of that, that special relationship we'll talk about later began to take root, not least as more and more Americans were based in the UK at Bletchley Park. But it also had a change here within Dayton. So I will move to the next slide as things started to happen here within Montgomery County. And again, it hugely impressive. Some of these, I guess I would add in front of them, arguably this is what is true. And the reason I say that is because lots of places will lay claim to certain things. But what is nevertheless true is that Dayton transformed, and this entire area. It is suggested, from what I could read from multiple sources, that indeed Montgomery County was the first county in the US to extend opening hours of shops and services to 8:30 p.m. And that was done to accommodate the war efforts that was going on at the time. It was also the area to first adopt the 48-hour working week, and that brought with it the need for those extended opening hours and the need for a workforce that was expected to meet those challenges. And again, going back to the work of Deeds, he had recruited locally, and I believe again there was politics as to why he couldn't recruit from MIT further afield. He recruited locally, which tells you again the source of talent that he could draw upon from within this area. It's also it was also a time with a male-dominated military that the workforce in this area changed as well to employ so many more females. And from what I can see, the women in the workforce doubled during that period of time as well. So much was going on. But of course, NCR did so much more in the way that was not to become public for decades afterwards. And its role in that secret role of decryption that few would know about for decades had begun to take shape. And the forebears of Oakwood, Dayton, Montgomery County residents may well have supported this effort to develop the code-breaking machines without actually knowing that that's what they were doing. Local contractors were tasked to produce high specification assemblies, high tolerance parts that were made to very particular and weird, unseen before type specifications as well. All very unique, and all they would do is drop them off down near NCR, and that was what seemed to be that's what seemed to sort of transform again some of the local industry here. Probably, from what I understand, many to this day, or to their final days, would not have realised that what they were doing was supporting the national code-breaking efforts, and in doing so, shaping World War II. So, I'm going to turn briefly to Joe Desch. And from what I learned, and again, deeply honoured that his daughter is here today. Not a little intimidated either. So, Joe Desch, educated at UD, supreme innovator. And he developed a number of things that I will just touch on very briefly. What I understand, and I hope I've got this right, is that in getting a security clearance with a German name, that made life a bit more tricky. However, absolute patriot to the last. And again, from what you see, he had some difficulty with some of the relatives who were still located in Germany. And that would have caused issues. So again, the sacrifices that are made, we should never forget in that field. But his achievements that I note in setting him apart to be selected for a leading role in code-breaking efforts included that he had beaten MIT to the development of the electronic calculator, the size of a modern-day dishwasher. But he had also explored the use of microfilm, magnetic digital recording, relatively high-speed printers for that period, And indeed, having worked at the Air Force Sustainment Center, they were still probably quicker than those. I'm sorry. But he gained a reputation as an innovator, leading NCR into the electronic age. At the same time, the US OP-20G, part of the Navy intelligence, was struggling to get into the electronic age. And so it lent on NCR. And back to, I was saying, how Deeds and others had postured it to be at the cutting edge of technology. And therefore, the talents that were amassed already in Montgomery County were ideal to begin to work on defeating the Nazi codes. But of course, it was a team effort, and it was led on the British side by Alan Turing. So enter Alan Turing or Benedict Cumberbatch. Frustratingly, as you look on the internet, it kept coming up with a Benedict Cumberbatch. In fact, and that picture is one that's combined. You just think, please, can we separate these? But all I've done is perpetuate that today, so I'm sorry. So Alan Turing, brilliant mathematician, not known for his empathy or social skills. But he obtained his PhD from Princeton, devised the approach to the decryption of the Enigma in the early years of the war, and invented the first BOMS machines, and became in the UK the chief scientific figure with particular responsibility for reading U-boat communications. As such, he became a top figure in the Anglo-American liaison and gained exposure to the most advanced electronic technology of the day. Further, he saw the future of electronic computing and had a vision for computer technology that was sadly not picked up by the UK government, the same as after the war, the US government picked up the potential for computing technology over here. Sadly, the British government has a habit of this. You may have heard of the Wright brothers. So they went to the UK in or around 1911 and said, you know what, we got this thing called a plane. You may be interested in this. The British Army were like, we've got a horse, we're much more, we're fine. Unfortunately, as events were to prove, the British were slow to that until they were the first to develop the world's first independent air force, of which I just get at it. But they were nevertheless slow to embrace, and that was one of the problems Turing faced through his career, was his genius not being recognized for what it was. And I would say how lucky you were here. The government saw the work here and continued it afterwards. So Turing came to Dayton, saw the American progress on the BOMS machines, and was one of those who saw the need for a deep relationship between the two nations. So you might say socially not very empathetic, but he was visionary and he understood the importance of this relationship, and specifically Bletchley Park to NCR, not forgetting, of course, the US intelligence sort of oversight of all of that. He did remark that the Americans had a peculiar way of expressing themselves. If any of you wish to challenge me on that, I'll just say the way that you use a Z over an S is something that I will never quite do. So what did Turing achieve during his visit to Dayton? Well, quite a lot. National survival was at stake, and the potential rivalries had to be put aside. This was critical. Since February 1942, the addition of a fourth rotor to the German Navy Enigma machines had prevented Turing's section of Bletchley Park from reading Atlantic U-boat traffic, with disastrous consequences that could strangle the UK and basically end the war. Turing was here to inspect on behalf of the British government the progress and the plans of the US Navy as it set out to build a larger number of BOMS machines for the attack on the four-rotor naval Enigma problem owned by Germany. As you can imagine, a foreigner who by all accounts lacked empathy was fiercely proud of his own design. Coming in here to inspect the bombs under construction would have taken a very delicate balancing act between, again, recognizing the need and overcoming personal pride. While much about Turing's visits remained shrouded in secrecy, it is clear that much was achieved. He wrote extremely well and complementary of American developments. He did have a healthy skepticism, as engineers do, that, well, they can't quite do it as well as I've done it. But we will come on to that in a few moments' time. But it strengthened those ties further and further, and Turing saw that along with his counterparts here. In the US Navy at this point insisted on taking over the problem and effectively requisitioned National Cash Register's works for a massive building program that was beyond the resources of British industry, and the British became the junior partner at that stage. The US could put together a capital building program that would basically dwarf what the UK could do. And it could put far more minds together to work on it than the UK could do. And the UK, again, swallowed the pride, knowing the need, acknowledged junior partner role. But I wanted to touch very briefly on this, as I live just down the road from Sugar Camp, had no idea what was there. And again, I'm curious, so we explored. So energized to join and motivated to join the US war effort and excited by the idea of global adventure, many women enlisted to join the US Navy, and in their global adventures were assigned to Sugar Camp. Yep, just down the hill in equatorial Dayton on sea. The Waves, or by their original title, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, played a major role in the game-changing efforts going on into Building 26. They were on the production lines for the BOMS machines and based out of Sugar Camp, and would make their way down each morning to Building 26. They kept the secrets of what they were doing classified, and again, most of them almost certainly through the duration of their lives. And they were often on the backstory that they were here on courses. And the Oakwood community, being the Oakwood community, took them in, hosted many of them, it would seem, for Sunday lunches, offered friendship, and indeed, from what I understand, there were some weddings as a result as well. There was also scandal. They brought skinny dipping to the area. From what I could see, they had to post sentries so that as the night watchman passed, they would then get back to doing their skinny dipping until the next night watchman passed a little bit later. They, like their British counterparts at Bletchley Park, found some prejudices at first in terms of, will the women be able to do this work? And the answer at the end of the war came as follows, from one of the senior Navy leadership, who said, never in the history of American intelligence have so many kept so many secrets for so long. And that was tribute to the Waves indeed. Now, the old tensions, and again, from my favorite movie, if you haven't picked up on that yet. All was not plain sailing between our two nations. Always reasons why. And yet, of course, history tells us that this was ultimately a very successful relationship. But the age-old question of trust, transparency, and that unity of effort came to the front. On the one level, the British had invented something that they were unbelievably proud of. But it's then at a time where if you wish, your younger sibling then sort of says, well, I can do more of this, and I can do them bigger, and I can do them faster. And that comes back to actually getting rid of Alan Turing's concerns in many ways, where he thought, can the Americans do this as well? They do it better, and they did. Bigger, faster, better. And that was fundamental by the end of the war, as I'll come on to. But in truth, there are just those examples of things where two large secretive organizations come together. And then it didn't even need to be multinational. It happens almost anywhere and anything you do. But Britain, in this case, was focused on Germany. Britain had to survive. And so that was Britain's focus. However, there was significant US public opinion towards, well, we need to go after Japan. Think of Pearl Harbor. And so there were those tensions about who held primacy and priority. But as time went on, it became less and less of an issue, albeit the British were still thought to be holding back secrets. I'm not sure that was necessarily the case from what I can see. Again, were things held from the US? Probably. Were they intentionally held from the US? Probably not. Because again, the imperative was too much. But nevertheless, tensions existed. But, and here's why overcoming those mattered. I talked about these earlier. In 1943, or as we talk these figures, as 1943, Britain could make 2 bombs per week. By that stage, the US was adding them at such a rapid rate of knots. And although at the beginning of 1943, Joe Desch had not yet cracked how to do the Enigma, the 4th wheel on the Enigma code and break the German Navy codes, by mid-1943, he had. That was Joe Desch, and I emphasize that. That was not Imitation Game and Alan Turing. And so that's fundamental. What happened time after time then was the way that they were built became quicker, their processing times became faster, until by the end, or by May 1944, the Allies were actually breaking the German codes and translating them into action in real time. And that is an unbelievable achievement to have done. So the US Army at that point pulled away, largely leaving the British to decrypt the 3-wheeled machines, and the German Navy still steered, the American Navy still very much steered the work on the 4-wheeled Enigma machines. The US Army went, as the US Army does, under codes of Madam X and Superscripture, to go off and look at the Japanese codes and put their efforts into that. The British, not to be beaten in operational code names, came up with Operation Bovril for ours, which, to those of you who don't know, is a nasty after-dinner drink that some people try. But the relationship out of D-Day. So, talked about the bombs had ramped up. Crucially, and I'll cover this bit very, very quickly. What happened on D-Day was that through the thorough breaking of the codes and the ability to real-time translate what was going on, Britain and America were able to embark on one of the biggest deceptions of the war. And that was the first US Army group that was led by General Patton, except it did not exist. But the Germans had become so convinced that that group existed and was going to invade into Calais. And the verification that the Germans knew was through all the code breaking that was going on. Army, Navy, Air Force were completely sucked into the idea that the main event was going to happen in Calais. So when it came to the invasion into Normandy, the Germans were still convinced that the real thing was going to happen with General Patton coming further out towards Belgium and the Netherlands. And that deception meant that the divisions that could have been responsible for thousands of Allied deaths on D-Day and even turned the invasion back never turned up. And so that's, again, a phenomenal tribute to, if you wanted a single result of this, that is it. So this is the final bit, and you're going, yeah, he's got a picture of some dirt up there. This is obviously Dayton today. I tried to find out what happened to the BOMS machines, and I will come on to Lloyd's conjecture in a few minutes. But they say that the original trial ones, the prototypes, ended up in the canal somewhere down near the fairground. I don't know, but that's not a fitting tribute to those if that is an accurate portrayal. The truth, or as well, for NCR Building 26, there's now a hotel in that area. What I did like, because again, I thought there's nothing here for something so monumental and groundbreaking across this globe. But what happened here, but of course, Carolyn Park was the thing that brought my attention to it in the first place. But I would love to see more. So that's just conjecture, or that's just my understanding of, unfortunately, what happened behind those machines. Many others were scrapped. But here's where I come on to my final chart. And that this one, it's really down to a little bit of what did this all mean and why is it mattering today? So I'll start first of all with why it matters today. The aircraft that you see, one has British markings, one has American. Identical aircraft, mixed crews, And they are some of the, this is all open source, by the way, but they are some of the most secretive systems on the planet. And they are operating over Ukraine today, or near Ukraine today. And they're a sign of that trust between nations to share information that no other nations on this planet do, apart from those within what's called the Five Eyes: US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. And it came from this relationship that began here. That intelligence sharing, you can see there, I've put in pictures of the NSA and the British General Communication Headquarters in Cheltenham in England. It all came because of the trust that started here. And that's what blows my mind away with this. And it carries on to this day, and long may it continue, because it's a good thing, I'm convinced. But you then come to, so why was this secretive for so long? Two possible thoughts. But first, so to keep it secret, well, people couldn't have known about it. So you say that. As the movie Imitation Game brings out, but as other sources do. The Soviets did have a plant in Bletchley Park, John Cairncross. But it does appear that he actually had quite limited knowledge based around breaking of the army system that he was sharing with the Soviet Union, because he felt it was the right thing to do. But he did not know how those codes were being broken. And the evidence for that as well is that those secrets were never passed to Stalin, as other than, here is information we've got on the next German moves. And that's what he was passing. Had Stalin known how to build BOMS machines, he would have built them, but he never did. So who knew about the BOMS machines and the code breaking? So why keep it secret? If the Soviets didn't know, why keep it secret? Well, the word out there is that the US and the UK sold off a lot of the Enigma machines after the war. Who did they sell them to? And why did they sell them? I'll leave that one. But the other part of that, not only the Germans used Enigma machines. If you're talking to neutral countries, and neutral countries are aware of what you're doing, and again, I leave that there. Why would we want to keep things secret for a long time that could be significantly embarrassing or awkward? And a lot more besides. So that's where I finish really in this discussion. It's a fascinating topic, but I think is still only part told. And one of the things I loved at the top, those who can imagine anything can create the impossible. That was Alan Turing, actually, a phenomenal quote. But it tells a story of everybody who was involved in this. So much is still secret. And I'm told, and I don't know if this is true, but some of the algorithms that Joe Desch and Alan Turing came up with are still secret, if that is true. So again, there's some fascinating stuff that is still out there that has just got my attention completely and my enjoyment. And so on that, I'll stop.
While Chris gets the light so you can see to ask questions, we do have a small token of our appreciation for this amazing presentation. We made a donation to the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in your name. There's a $50 gift certificate for Dorothy Lane Markets. Go get some killer brownies afterwards. And we thank you so much. So if you have any questions, please.
Yes.
Why did they call it the bomb? BOMB.
Do you know, that's a really good question. So do you know, I brought this along because I'm going to make, I deliberately brought a pen. So I thought I'm going to be asked things that I've tried to cover so much. I will find out and I'll make sure that it's back within the library with that answer. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that.
The Poles called it the bomba machine, B-O-M-B-A. And so when they imported the technology from the Poles, they called it the bomb.
I've got you. All right, thank you. Oh,
Thank you.
There you are.
And I also understand that when they were talking, the Poles were talking, they happened to be eating. And they were eating that wonderful dessert. And so they came up with, oh, well, let's call it that.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Thank you. Thank you.
When the British and or the Americans broke the German code, what did they come up with? Was it German text? Was it German numbers? Was it both? And was it only about the seas and the Atlantic?
Right. So it came out from what I've seen of everything is just as normal text. It's the BOMS machines, sorry, the Enigma machines would encrypt and scramble the letters so that they looked just completely random. But when they were then able to decrypt them, they would come out as actual sentences. You know, for example, I'll give one that I don't know is true, but I know the story itself is, we are going to bomb Coventry tonight, which was certainly a message that the British became aware of, that Germans were going to bomb Coventry. And it would have been in something as fairly straightforward as that. It was broken by, so the codes were Army, Navy, Air Force, diplomatic service, weather, and actually the weather was the one that helped the British as well, because they were on U-boats, but they were using 3 codes, 3 wheels, not 4. So they were still giving away something. I saw a hand over this way somewhere. Yes.
How realistic is the movie, The Imitation Game?
So from what I can see, and I will always, I will qualify with what I can see, because I know there are people in here who've got a lot of knowledge and we see things in different perspectives. But from what I can see, some of it was very realistic or very based on truth. I think there was quite a bit of poetic license in there as well. And that's what frustrates me a little with any movie that puts out there that it's historic and at the end puts the historic context that makes you feel you've almost watched a documentary with actors. And so I don't think it's, I guess 50% right is probably not a bad one. Yes.
You were talking about the movie, but are there documentaries on these things that are really reliable to your knowledge?
I don't know if there are. I've not come across one. I've come across some very good books. The one that first drew my attention in Britain in the late 90s was one called Station X, and that started again to fascinate me. To go, myself and my wife went then to Station X, because it was still just emerging from the shadows, and it was an overgrown old manor house in the English countryside that had been left because we didn't want to flag what had been going on there. Now they built it into a full museum, but Station X is a good book. There was a series that was called something like Station X that was very fictional. Not a fan of it. Yes.
Why is the secret still on the classification of?
Well, that's the thing that intrigues me, is to keep things secret for, in the UK, the rule is 25 years, then they'll have a 30-year rule, then they'll have a 50-year rule. This has gone way beyond. They've released a lot of information, but it comes back to me to what is still so awkward, and not, I believe, truly to our 2 nations. What do we know as 2 nations that we don't want to let out? That's one. Algorithms, I have no idea. Again, you talk maths to me, excuse me, math, I should say, and I have no, I get lost very easily. I can't even spell it right. Yes.
You were talking about Karen Cross. In the movie, Mark Strong plays an MI6 agent, and he passes information to Peter Khrushchev, who's running the Battle of Stalingrad.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about with Karen Cross, or was he actually a double agent for the Russians?
He was a double agent, sadly. There was a group of them. They something like known as something like the Cambridge spy ring,
Right.
and there was a group of them that sort of emerged that had been recruited in World War II, very intellectual but very left leaning, and they were picked off by the Soviet spy rings. But as I say, what does appear is that the British were deliberately giving the Russians intelligence. I mean, that was part of it. Cairncross was giving them more from a lower level that he could see. But I know, for example, that the Enigma was very big, or the breaking of it was very big, and the biggest tank battle, to my knowledge, that's ever still happened in Kursk. And we were feeding, you know, from what we got, where the Germans were going to attack, when they were going to attack, what units, and so on. So Stalin had to have a knowledge that we were doing something. Yes.
In 2012, I was lucky enough to be able to go visit Bletchley Park. And at that time, all of the outbuildings that they preserved were museum displays and so forth. And even as a ham radio operator, I was excited to see Radio Society of Great Britain has a display. But the main building was said to be just open for scheduled meetings and rented out, I guess, let out for organizations. And all we could see was the lobby. I'm wondering, is intelligence work still going on in that building? Do you know?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I mean, broadly speaking, the UK is pretty open about where, you know, its main areas are. Like you can see there, I've even got it on screen there, the facility at GCHQ in the west of England. No, I wouldn't have thought so, honestly. Yes.
My understanding is that the British bombs were using relays for the switching. And it's sort of like a computer now uses zeros and ones, and they were using relays to represent those zeros and ones. And that National Cash Register had already progressed to the point where they were using vacuum tubes, which were much faster. And that was the reason that Dayton got the nod to look at the higher number of rings on the Enigma.
Yes, I think that is true. I read quite a lot on the technology differences, and it did become very clear, as I sort of mentioned at one point, that the US side was doing it better, faster, and more reliable. And as I say, thank goodness. And that's where you go back, say that story was a while in the making, in terms of like Deeds and Kettering, who were building the high-tech hub here. In the UK, it was very much pulling together mathematicians and beginning to start from a slower start. So there was some great foresight here, and I think it still carries on to this day in this area as well. So, okay. Yes.
So my question had to do more with the personalities involved, Desch and Turing, and just the comment of when you introduced Turing on the slide as being, quote, an introvert. And then we know that, as I understand it, anyway, he was homosexual. So that background, was that out and open with the people he was working with at the time, or did he really have to hide that? And
he had to hide that. And again, there's definite, when a nation treats you as badly as that at the end of the war, which there's no doubt the UK did, it was because certain people suspected that he was doing something that was illegal. So there's a lot of sadness to attach to that, and it took Britain a long time to then find it, you know, modernize itself, if you will, to reward him properly. But it was all a bit late, really. Okay. Yes.
Were either of these gentlemen paid money in any way to do what they did?
I mean, I guess they were on the wages. Turing was certainly on the government payroll. I would imagine Joe Desch was on the payroll of NCR, that in turn was on the payroll of the US Navy at that time. So yes, I would say very much so. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
My understanding is that not everybody in the US side trusted Joe Desch, and that they actually had stationed a military guard outside his house at night.
The man actually lived in his house.
So they were actually living
Two-bedroom
with.
house,
Yeah.
and the man had one room twin cell.
Yeah.
So
We
the
got to
family-
stop.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was, the Bureau of Ships would only accept NCR's contract if they could position, because of Dad's German heritage, if they could position a person living in the home. And it wasn't that they didn't trust him, it was his German heritage, and he had a 3,000-watt transmitter in the basement, and he spoke German.
yes.
Was there actually a woman on the team for Turing and Hilton and the rest of them?
Was there what? Sorry.
Was there a woman on the team?
Oh, yeah, there was quite a few, and that was going back to where I say those prejudices back then that very quickly got ironed out, that women were every bit as capable of men as doing it. And I think again, it's what transformed ideas in the workplace out of necessity. Yeah.
Any other questions? I don't want to cut it off early, but
I just want to know, was Bletchley somebody's house, or was it before
Yes.
they started all this?
Yes, I don't know whose. There's quite a number of houses, quite a few officers' messes in the UK. And the Royal Air Force was sold by various philanthropists to the Royal Air Force, to the British Army for £1. And there was dozens of them across the UK that were sold for £1 on the condition that they had to be returned in exactly the same state at the end, which unfortunately is why the Royal Air Force hasn't handed a load of them back, because it would cost them.
I just thought people want to know that the house where my parents lived in Meter State is right down on Greenmount Boulevard, 413.
Yes.
So it's within walking distance.
so are you willing to hang around too if people have questions or for a few minutes?
Yeah, I went right with compliment and
We have his daughter here, if any of you have questions.
Yes.
The question about where the property came from for Bletchley, can be found on Wikipedia if you trust that source.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you so very much.